Thank you. Half a day and good afternoon. The Committee on General Government Operations, Appropriations, and Housing is now called to order. Today is Tuesday, December 21st, 2021. The time now is 1:30. Welcome to everyone connected by Zoom and those tuning in via television or Zoom platform while we maintain social distancing mandates. Public notice for this public hearing were disseminated via email to all senators and all main media broadcasting outlets on Monday, December 13, and then on Friday, December 17. The agenda, we have an agenda today. We have 3 bills on today, but we're going to begin with Bill number 170-36 LS as amended by the Committee on General Government Operation, Appropriations, and Housing, introduced by Senator Frank Blas Jr., co-sponsored by myself, Senator Joe Agustin, and Senator Tony Ada. An act to appropriate the sum of $250,000 from the 2021 Earned Income Tax Credit reimbursement and or the 2021 General Fund unappropriated revenues to the Guam Unique Merchandise and Art GUMA for the purpose of providing financial assistance to the incubated business graduates of the GUMA program. To the people of Guam, I just wanted to make sure everybody's in understanding that this bill was heard, but we're hearing it again because we wanted to add in the event there's available unappropriated revenues from 2021, that'll be an option while we're waiting for the reimbursement of the EITC. So that will be given the first option. The general rules of conduct. The Zoom meeting is hosted by my staff and will mute all Zoom participants until called upon. Members of the committee and non-committee members will be allowed to pose a question to the individual testifying. Individuals testifying shall first be recognized by myself before speaking and begin by stating their name for record-keeping purposes when called to speak. Please ensure that you are unmuted. Question testimony shall be confined to the substance or nature of the agenda. Personal inference as to the character or the motive of any senator or individual testifying is not permitted. Any violation of this general rule of conduct will result in the removal from the virtual public hearing. Please ensure that your video remains on throughout the hearing. Participants will be visible at all times and not engage in any activity during the hearing. Failure to maintain visibility may cause your removal from the meeting live stream. Please be advised to all participants that if you're having a drink or having a little snack, I have no problem with that. You won't be taken off the meeting live stream. I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues that have joined us this afternoon. We have the sponsor of the bill, or the author of the bill, Senator Frank Blas Jr. We have co-sponsor Senator Tony Ada, and we have Senator Terlaje also joined us. I'd ask Senator Blas to give an opening if he feels he needs to, because it's just the amendment of the bill is just to add an option to go with the unappropriated money. Senator Blas, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, as you had stated, this bill had a hearing previously, but as the committee had saw that there is another opportunity for another funding source, I appreciate the committee has taken the initiative or to be able to include that as part of the bill, amendment to the bill. Again, I earnestly request that this bill, this is to help aspiring and up and coming entrepreneurs and artists so that we can bolster our economy and grow our economy, especially in these challenging times. And what this will provide is the assistance, the financial assistance to be able to assist, to help these businesses as they start up and as they grow. So once again, Mr. Chair, I want to thank the committee for finding the possibility of another revenue stream and to including this so that we can actually get the funding to this organization. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Blas. I'd like to also recognize another colleague, Speaker Teresa Rice, joined us. With that note, I'd like to ask Monica Guzman, Guam Unique Merchandise and Art. She's here to testify. Ma'am, Monica.
Thank you, Senator Agustin, and good afternoon to the members of the committee. Senator Ada, Senator Blas, Speaker Terlaje. Thank you so much, and Senator Terlaje. I'd like to wish you all a Merry Christmas. It's a beautiful day in paradise, and having the public hearing today where you're just going to modify the bill. As said earlier, I would just like to reintroduce the testimony I gave earlier at the previous public hearing. But, you know, just to summarize, if we get the funding for Guam Unique Merchandise and Art, then of course that funding will be used to incubate new businesses on Guam. And, you know, just so that we don't take up a lot of time, I'm just totally in support of this bill again. And I know that all of our incubators and our entrepreneurs and a lot of our cultural community that all want to start their own business, I'm sure I speak for them in support of this bill. Thank you very much, and Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Monica. Merry Christmas. I'm looking at the Zoom. I see Mr. Byrne is here. Ed, did you want to speak on this bill, or you're just listening on, or you're just here for the war claims bill? Go ahead and unmute, Mr. Byrne.
Good afternoon. I'm actually in California, but so yes, I was really here for the war claims bill, but I am listening, and if I can be of any help on the other bills, I'll certainly chime in.
All right, thank you. Okay, I'll ask now. If any of my colleagues would like to ask any questions, we'll start with, and I'll save Senator Blas for the end. Senator Ada, do you have anything you would like to bring up?
No questions, Mr. Chair. Just like to thank you for having this second hearing and also putting the other avenues for or other means for funding of this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Senator. And just for the people of Guam, the only reason why we have to do the second hearing is to ensure that it's germane to the bill, that if we were to make any amendments, such as the adding the other source, it has to be first heard publicly. And that being so, we're having this hearing. So, Madam Speaker, did you have anything you wanted to bring up?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. And thank you for those who are here testifying. But I did have a question for Mr. Byrne, if he would answer. So during the last committee of the whole, when you were present down in the Guam legislature, we were talking about using a similar funding source that was revenue from 2021 over and above the 20 million that had been additionally appropriated during the FY22 budget. But you had, I guess I don't see a new fiscal note for this bill. Mr. Chair, can I just confirm, is there a new fiscal note for the amended bill?
No, there isn't, but we did request, and DBMR advises they'll be submitting it soon.
All right, thanks. So Mr. Byrne, if you could confirm as to the funding source. So do you expect, can you just talk in general about these funding sources? So one is the 2021 calendar year earned income tax credit reimbursement. The other one is 2021 general fund unappropriated revenues.
Yes, Speaker, thank you for the question. As you know, I'm not terribly enamored of this way of expressing the funding for these bills. In my view, you know, the general fund, if it's that fund that's chosen to fund this particular bill or any other bill, the general fund amount, the balance is what should be available to fund these bills. To identify and isolate excess funding, although it may well amount to the same thing, and sometimes it does, and in this case, I suspect it will, is to my mind not a very good way of expressing it. Nevertheless, right, this is the way the bill is written, and this is the way we will operate the bill, and we will identify. You know, we've spoken about this many times. I was trying to demonstrate there's a difference between excess revenues and a calculated surplus, and excess revenues can be reduced by other expenses in order to calculate the actual surplus. And that's why I'm not terribly enamored of this way of expressing it. Nevertheless, in this particular case, I do believe there will be sufficient funding in the general fund balance as a result of an anticipated surplus for the fiscal year 2021.
Okay, because you had told us during the committee of the whole that the other bills that we were trying to fund with 2021 excess revenues, LEAP, I think, for example, and the war claims, that we could fund those if we didn't fund anything else. So I just want to confirm with you.
Yes, I think I was trying to narrow it, and I may have actually corrected myself when I said that, to bills that were not yet in progress. This bill was already in progress, so I had it already, if not formally allocated, certainly in my head. I was concerned about that. I think I did mention this, that there's a whole lot of bills behind those two bills which we were discussing, which would strain the resources of the general fund.
Which two bills?
We mentioned that we put 10 million for the war claims and 25 million for LEAP. So those two bills and whatever was in front of it, and this one was in front of those two bills, as far as I was concerned, we were content with the funding. But I was concerned, and I think this is what I did express, that there's a whole lot of other bills subsequent to those two bills, not yet in public hearing, which would, if progressed, strain the general fund.
Are you stating a priority then for any particular bills prior versus subsequent for funding?
I was only expressing that I knew of certain bills. I didn't know of, and certainly there may well be bills that are not yet even published, which I don't know about. I can speak about the bills.
Yeah, we just had a hearing this morning, bill to be funded out of earned income tax credit, and presumably to be amended to be funded out of this same funding source from 2021 general fund, but that would be a subsequent bill.
Yes.
Mr. Byrne, what about what you said the excess revenues would be decreased by other expenditures? Can you tell us what other expenditures you're expecting besides those that are obviously, I don't know, what are they? What is the 2021 excess revenues going to be decreased by this year?
I can reiterate what I spoke about during the committee of the whole, is that the number one issue that we have to deal with, because there's no cash flow appropriated, are continuing appropriations. Those two words create an appropriation but don't create the cash. So I need to take account of those, an estimate, because when you prepare a set of financial statements, you include estimates. I would have to take an estimate of those. There are although the closing for the financial statements has now occurred, we are accumulating bills that came in from all over the government, from different departments, that hadn't been, that relate to 2021, but hadn't been submitted to us. So that's something that we need to make sure is included in fiscal 21, and that would reduce. That's an expenditure that would have to be offset against any revenues. So we're currently working through all those issues in the financial statements, and I think I also mentioned that there's a possibility. I can't say whether that's going to be the case or not. There's a possibility that there might be claims against the government, and we'd have to identify those and recognize those as an appropriate expenditure for fiscal 21. So those are three examples of what might have to be recognized in the financial statements, which would have to be offset against any excess revenues.
Thank you. And when we were in committee of the whole, we had asked you for an approximate amount of the continuing appropriation. And at that time, you couldn't give us one. Are you able to give us an approximate?
No, no, Speaker. We're working through that now. That's the whole purpose of drawing up the financial statements. So we're working through that now. And that's what we will identify.
Your testimony, there will be enough money to pay for these several bills. And so that's why I'm thinking you must have had an estimate in order to make it guess that there would be enough money at the end of paying what you've just listed, the continuing appropriations, the bills that are owed and coming, existing claims against the government.
Well, that's my estimate at the moment.
Yeah, what is the estimate?
I don't have a number for you, but you know, but in my head, you know, balancing all these items, because as you yourself recognized in the committee of whole, there was a excess revenues of 60 million. We discussed this at the time, that there was sufficient funding to pay for what we know, right? There's always a possibility that something might happen that we don't know. That is the whole purpose of drawing up financial statements, and that will be available when we complete the financial statements.
And when will that be?
We're working through it now. We closed. It's dependent on a whole lot of factors, but our latest estimate, I've spoken to our auditors, our latest estimate is the last week of April, the first week of May.
That's quite a ways from now. And so when
Yeah, there could be a whole lot of bills, I know, between now and May, but that's the nature of it.
Yes, there are already a whole lot of bills. That's why I'm trying to get some concrete numbers from our government officials so that we can, you know, use them reliably. All right. Of course, I have no objection to the intent of the program. I just want to clarify because there are other bills that we are seeing and hearing, and it's becoming very unclear to me. And I guess, Mr. Chair, if you have some concrete numbers that you could share with us, or try to help me to get some information out of the Department of Administration and BBMR as to what these concrete numbers of continuing appropriations should be. Those should have been calculatable since the FY21 budget was passed, or the FY22 budget was passed. The bills owed, I guess those are new. You said newly coming in, but the claims against the government, I would hope we would have an idea as to that as well.
Madam Speaker, you cannot calculate the continuing appropriations until you've recognized all the expenses of the financial year that have to be recognized. It's not something that you can do at the closure of the year. It's almost the penultimate page of our audited statements is a listing of the financial continuing appropriations for the year.
What about deficit? You didn't mention any deficit. Is the excess revenues going to be decreased by any deficit? Or are these what you're counting as deficit?
Well, whatever the result.
Mr. Byrne, hold on. Madam Speaker, let's focus on Bill 170. I understand your concern, and I'm going to ask that question of the administration.
I'm trying to get to the funding source of this bill, Mr. Chair. That's exactly what we're talking about. He's estimating that there will be enough from the it's called the 2021 General Fund Unappropriated Revenues, and I'm trying to find out what they are exactly, because he said they will be reduced by a list of items, but we were not given any details on the list of items as to amounts. So, and we have more than one bill, that's going through the pipes right now, and I want to know, so what are we talking about as to amounts? So just, Mr. Byrne, is there any additional deficit that will be paid with the excess revenues, or is it just these items that you've listed?
That's not the way it works. As you know, we have a deficit, an overall deficit of 1.5 million. this administration, wisely in my view, has chosen to continue to reduce the deficit. And the only way that you can reduce the deficit is by declaring appropriately and properly a surplus for the financial year. The first thing that's going to happen is we have to finally, I mean, it's quite an achievement to go from 83 million to just 1.5 million, but it's quite an achievement finally to have completely eliminated the deficit. So the first 1.5 million, obviously, will go to that. Those that look at our financial statements from outside want to see us declare and grow a surplus. As I think I've discussed with you before, our budgets are balanced budgets. If nothing else happened, our revenues would equal our expenditures and there would be no effect on the surplus, good or bad. In order to satisfy those who look at our financials, we need to continue to declare a surplus and not use up all the revenues, because they will think that that more than anything will lead them to think that our finances are out of control.
So go ahead.
So the important thing to concentrate on is, just like, if you're in a private business, you want to declare a profit and you put those profits in reserves because you do not know what the future will bring. You can call it a rainy day fund, you can call it an unappropriated surplus, whatever sum is set aside is there to meet any unexpected expenditures. And we've been lucky enough in the last few years not to have any unexpected expenditures, but it will benefit from any unexpended revenues, and hopefully there are going to be some revenues that we're going to gain. For instance, from the from the lawsuit to recover some of the funds that we spent on the Ordot landfill remediation. But in the end, right, those that look at our finances would think it not prudent financial management to constantly either run a deficit or not attempt to report a surplus.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask my question one more time. That is, so you're saying now, Mr. Byrne, that the surplus, that you're going to declare a surplus and then you may use 1.5 million of the surplus to pay for deficit. Is the deficit that what you used when you described 1.5 million deficit, does that include the other, the bills that are owed, the claims against the government, or the continuing appropriations? Are those separate?
No, Madam Speaker,
different categories?
that's the deficit that we reported at the end of fiscal 20.
That's
Fiscal
right.
20.
Okay, I wanted you to confirm that on the record, Mr. Byrne. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Tello, do you have any questions to pose to Ms. Monica Guzman or Mr. Byrne?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon. A lot of the questions I had were asked of the speaker, but the response from DOE, it's just confusing. I understand that you lowered the deficit. The administration keeps touting about lowering it to $1.5 million, but as we're moving through another year, that's not going to be raining federal funds on our doorsteps like it has been doing. It's, I think a conservative approach is important. And if I'm not mistaken, if there's to determine any kind of surplus, I think it would take at least until June of next year to determine that through the public auditor's report to determine any kind of surplus. Would it take that long, Mr. Burns, for us to determine that?
Senator, I just responded in response to.
Sorry, Mr. Burns, I couldn't very hear you. I'm sorry, I'm in a bad area. So if you can just repeat it, Okay.
Yes, I will repeat what I said to the
Thank you,
speaker,
thank you.
that we expect, all things being equal, to issue our financial statements the last week of April, first week of May.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Mr. Burns. That's all I need to know. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wish everyone a Merry Christmas and thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tadiwi. I believe there's no one else to speak on this bill. I'll ask Senator Frank Blas to go ahead and close, and then we'll go ahead and we'll wrap up this bill, and we can move to the next bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Monica, for being here. Mr. Byrne, thank you. You know, I'm sorry to take you away from what you were doing in California, and to my colleagues for the questions and everything. I think that Madam Speaker, I agree with you. We want to make sure we cross our T's and dot our I's with regards to where this funding source is at, so that this is not a, for lack of a better term, a promise not being able to keep. Okay, and so we, at the end of the day, what we want to do is get the financial assistance to this project, to this organization, so that businesses, we can incubate more business, we can grow business, we can grow our economy. We got a long ways to go with regards to rebounding and getting out of this hole that that unfortunately we're in. Not to any of our faults. It's this is just what has happened. And Mr. Chair, I look to the movement of this bill onto the floor and for a unanimous vote from my colleagues to be able to support the GUMA organization for this funding. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Senator Blas. The committee will continue to receive testimony and please submit your testimony to the mailroom of the Guam Legislature or through email at Senator Joe S. Agustin @gmail.com. Again, I want to thank everyone for attending this virtual public hearing and for providing feedback and suggestions. The public hearing is now adjourned on Bill 170-36 LS. That being said, we will now move to Bill 172-36. Oh, correction, it is now, the time now is 1:58 on Bill 170. We'll now move and call to order for Bill 172. Colleagues, I think I have the same colleagues are current present. I'll just move down the line for, I think everybody was still present when I read the rules of conduct. But the agenda is Bill 172-36 as amended by the Committee on General Government Operations, Appropriations, Housing, introduced by myself, co-sponsored by Senator Ridgell, Vice Speaker Tina Rose Muña Barnes, Senator Frank Blas, Senator Amanda Shelton, and St. Pedo Terlaje. An act to appropriate $3,500,000 from 2021 earned income tax credit reimbursement and or the 2021 general fund unappropriated revenues to the Guam Historic Preservation Trust for the purpose of revitalization and renovation of the historic Francisco Q. Sanchez Elementary School under the jurisdiction of the HUMÅTAK Mayor's Office. Reminder, the Zoom meeting is hosted by my staff and will mute all Zoom participants until called upon. Members of the committee and non-committee members will be allowed to pose questions to an individual testifying. Individuals testifying shall first be recognized by me before speaking and begin by stating their name for record-keeping purposes. When called to speak, please ensure that you are unmuted. Question and testimony shall be confined to the substance or nature of the agenda. Personal inference as to the character or the motive of any senator or any individual testifying is not permitted. Any violation of this general rule or conduct will result in the move from the virtual public hearing. Be ensure that your video remains on throughout the hearing. Participants must be visible at all times and not engaged in other activity during the hearing. Failure to maintain visibility may cause your removal from the meeting live stream. If you're having a drink, having a small snack, there's not a problem with that one. We won't fault you for that. I'd like to thank my colleagues again, Senator Frank Blas, join us, and Tony Addis, Madam Speaker Therese Terlaje, and Senator Terlaje. Colleagues, make sure your video is on, all right? A reminder, the Bill 172-36 what the committee has done is we identified an amendment had to be made to reflect the addition of language to read and or from 2021 general fund unappropriated revenue. This added language will provide additional or an alternative funding for the project, just like the bill we heard earlier. This will ensure that Guam President's Trust is funded to renovate the historic school to preserve and maintain the FQ Sanchez Elementary School, allowing for continued use by the people of HUMÅTAK. This bill was heard before. We're just doing another hearing for the purpose of adding the amendment to ensure that it is germane to the bill. That being said, I would ask Joe Canata from Guam Presbyterian Trust if you'd like to speak in reference to the bill. Thank you, sir.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. My name is Joe Kinata, the Chief Program Officer of the Guam Preservation Trust, and I would like to thank everyone for supporting this bill through, and you know, we've submitted our testimony earlier, and we stand with that testimony. Again, Sinzus Mase for your support with this. As well as the support of over 600 folks that actually signed in to support our efforts. So if there are any questions, I can answer.
All right, Joe, until they ask you a question then. Okay.
Sure.
I'll begin with Senator Frank Blas. Do you have any questions for Mr. Canata or anybody else that happens to be zooming in?
Not at this time, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Senator Ada?
Nothing, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, do you have any comment on this one? It's pretty much the same as that bill.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any questions for Mr. Kanata. Thank you, Mr. Kanata. I do have a question for Mr. Byrne, though, again. On the funding source, it's the same funding source as in the last bill. It's either EITC for 2021, which my understanding was already appropriated in the budget bill, or 2021 general fund unappropriated revenues, which according to the CRER shows 62 million, but according to Mr. Byrne, we shouldn't be using these terms general fund unappropriated revenues, and we should be using the general fund balance. So Mr. Byrne, during the committee of the whole, during our last committee of the whole, during session, you testified under oath that the general fund balance that we should be looking at was more like 20 million. So are there, you know, is there going to be 62 million available at the end of the year to pay for the continuing appropriations, the bills that are owed, the claims against the government, and the LEAP and the war claims? Or is there going to be $20 million fund balance available for those things? And the $1.5 million deficit.
Madam Speaker, maybe I could remind you that when we had that discussion, there were two streams that we were talking about. One was the general fund balance, and you're correct. At that time, my estimate was that we were going to report a surplus of 20 million, and I know nothing different today. The other source that you were talking about, and you yourself mentioned it in your question, is the EITC reimbursements that, and we were clear to define that during our discussion on the Committee of the Whole, that although they're called fiscal 21 EITC reimbursements, they actually will be received in fiscal 22, because that is when the tax refunds in respect of fiscal 21 will be paid out. So, you know, other than that, since you asked the same question, I must think that my answer is going to be the same.
Okay, what's your answer this time?
It's the same. It's no different, because I think you were asking the same question.
All right, so is calendar year or are there earned income tax credit reimbursements for calendar year 2021 available in the amount of 3.5 million to pay for this bill?
As the fiscal note says, Madam Speaker, we don't yet know because we haven't concluded our discussions with US Treasury as to what the actual reimbursement is going to be. May I remind you that when we received the funds for the child tax credit, it went into a special bank account, and we've been paying out child tax credits for 5 months out of that bank account. That bank account was funded so far to a much greater amount than we have paid out. And it is certainly our hope that we will have sufficient funding in the ITC account up front to pay for all the ITC reimbursements that are supposed to be paid. This situation, fortunate though it was, arose because up to now we've been paying out the ITC reimbursements basically out of our general fund revenues. Under this new arrangement with the US government, they are going to reimburse us for those reimbursements that previously we had to bear. So it's not really, whereas the net effect is, if you compare year on year, we are going to have a better result because we're getting that reimbursement. What we are actually doing is still paying out those reimbursements. So there's really, and maybe I should reiterate this even further. Although your concerns about there being sufficient funding to pay for all the charges that are required on the government funds are well founded, we have managed over the past 2 years to do all that. We've reduced the surplus, the deficit to 1.5 million. We've reduced the accounts payable aging to 30 days. So the management of the finances, despite what I can only hope are not misgivings on your part, seem to have been done adequately to be able to report all these good results.
Mr. Byrne,
and I don't really feel that there's going to be
you're
any different
reporting
in this part.
Mr. Byrne, I don't know if that's an answer to my question, but part of the results that you're reporting are because the legislature has very much been conservative in its budgeting and its authorizing in expenditures and not exceeding what we've estimated in revenue. And that's why we have been able as a government to pay off some of our deficit because of discipline by the legislature. And
that certainly is a contributing factor, but management of expenses is as important.
That's correct. We have to work together. And so I just really want to know, if there is, when you testified before us in the Committee of the Whole, you were very explicit in your caution, and you said that what was showing in the CRER as was in addition, excess revenues, and that you said there is likely to be a surplus of revenues over the appropriated revenues that would go into the general fund.
About 11.7 million was what the CRER at the end of October said. Well, today, the CRER, which was published today, as of the end of November, shows an improvement on that to about 17 million.
All right. So you're saying your caution is no more about these amounts on the LEAP. So we could pay for the LEAP, and we could pay for the with general funds, and we could pay for the work claims with general funds. Based upon, I want to emphasize, assuming that no further calls are made upon the general fund through other bills being passed by this body, because there's no way that you can determine which comes first. Expenditures arise. You want to limit the amount of appropriation from the general fund, and you'll probably find out many people the other things about limiting the amount of money coming out of the general fund. But so, okay. So can you reconcile that $20 million balance that you told us during the committee of the whole and 62? So can we appropriate up to 62 or what are you using? So what amount are you using, Mr. Byrne? Are you using 20 million or are you using, 62 minus 20 or minus the LEAP, which is 25 minus the war claims? Or what amount are you using?
No, may I remind you what I said, because you asked that question in the committee of the whole.
I better change now, Mr. Byrne, because now we're talking about a $62 million, and we went down each amount at that time, and now you're telling me everything has changed because of the 62 million. So I'd like
No, ma'am, I'm not telling you everything has changed. Please, if I may finish, right? As I said then, right, that you have to recognize that the LEAP, the LEAP funding and the war claims funding are fiscal 22 funding items. I'm not going to take account of those because I went through the items of which I was going to take account just now on the testimony on the previous bill. Those are items that need to be recognized for fiscal 21 because they're in respect of fiscal 21. The effect of recognizing them is to effectively utilize what you can easily see, because it's been reported in the CRAR, as the excess of revenues over the budgeted revenues. That's not the same thing as these bills, which will be fiscal 22. The things that will reduce fiscal 21, as I mentioned earlier, are the continuing appropriations, the unrecognized the unrecognized billings that we get that agencies hold on to them. Agencies hold on to them because they can't identify funding. So we have to go through an exercise at the end of the year to identify the funding with which to pay those bills. And that's the process we're completing now. And I think I also mentioned that one of the charges on the general fund are the deficits which we're seeing in the special funds. And because the general fund is responsible ultimately for everything, the deficits, and again, I estimated that at 20 million, if you recall, the deficits on the special funds will be offset against the any recognized surplus in the general fund.
Okay, thank you. So, so we're not going to use any of the excess FY21 or the surplus FY21 revenue for the LEAP or the war claims you're testifying now. And what about?
I didn't say that.
You said you were accounting for that for FY20
I said that they would be recognized as a 2022 expenditure if you have to use some of the surplus, because we're dealing with estimates here. Here we are in November, right? Estimating what our revenues and expenditures are going to be for the year to September. We've got really good at doing it, and that's why I'm cautiously optimistic. But if we have to use, like we said before, if we have to use an unappropriated balance, it's there because we expect to. If you take 20 million and deduct the deficit of 1.5 million, you're left with 18.5 million. It's there, but we will endeavour not to use it because, as I said before, those that look at our finances. And there are a lot of people that look at our finances outside because they're doing research for a whole range of investors. They want to see that we report a surplus.
Yes, that would be great, Mr. Byrne. And I'm hoping that we as a legislature are going to be able to see that too sooner rather than later. Because, for example, if we are counting on that money for the funding of this, I would hope that the administration could show us those estimated amounts right now. If we're going on estimates, then we can use estimates, right? But to give no numbers at all, I just think that just leaves us, kind of at your mercy of, we'll find it someplace, and I think we
No,
should
no,
have
no,
some
Madam
buffer,
Speaker,
Mr. Byrne.
at your mercy. It's your mercy because it's your bill.
Well,
All right, do
trying
do
to
you
fund
have
this
anything
bill,
else,
Mr.
Madam
Byrne.
Speaker?
So, Mr. Byrne, you're saying in the end that there's also, in addition to the LEAP and the ward claims and the veterans bill and the other bills that we talked about earlier, that there's also 3.5 million for this bill. That's what you're saying from FY21 revenues.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Mr. Byrne.
Okay, is there any, was there something you asked, Madam Speaker? I think
No,
that was
I'm
it.
good,
Right?
Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Senator Tello, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. None at this time. It sounds like the same comments that were being made. I'm looking forward to reviewing all the committee of the whole in our last session to try and match up what was said today versus what was said during the committee of the whole, and go from there. But I greatly appreciate the opportunity. And though I support the intent of the legislation, I also believe in being financially responsible, especially with the people of Guam's money, and not be anxious to, spend it when we already are showing a shortfall in FY 2022 special revenues that came out in the CRER report. I think it's over $2.5 million in special funds that we're already short, and that's starting to show a trend. So, and of course, Mr. Chair, the Build Back Better, we're finding now through information coming our way that funds that we're anticipating may not be there as well. So we really need to tighten our belts. So thank you for the opportunity, and Merry Christmas to everyone.
All right, thank you, Senator Tyree. That being said, that there's no one else to testify, and just a reminder, the committee will continue to receive testimony. Please submit your testimony to the mailroom of the Guam Legislature or through email at Senator Joe S. Agustin at gmail.com. And because of comments made, questions asked, and statements made, we'll amend the bill appropriately. And so will the previous bill earlier. And that being said, let me close this up, this bill, and we'll get ready for the next bill. I want to thank everyone for attending this virtual public hearing and for providing feedback and suggestions. The public hearing is now adjourned for Bill 172-36 LS. The time now is 2:18 p.m. We will now proceed to, let's take a quick 5-minute recess, and we'll be right back. So please, folks that you're there, just give me 5 minutes so we can set up for the next hearing. Thank you. Thank you and half a day to the people of Guam. The Committee on General Government Operation, Appropriation, and Housing is now called to order. Today is Tuesday, December 21st. Time now is 2:27. Welcome to everyone connected by Zoom and those tuning in via television or the YouTube channel. Thank you for your patience and for accommodating the Zoom platform while we maintain social distancing mandates. Public notice for this public hearing were disseminated via email to all senators and all main media broadcasting outlets on Monday, December 13th and Friday, December 17th. The agenda today, this afternoon now, is on Bill 230-36 LS. Committee on Rules by request of the I Maga'hågan Guåhan, the Governor of Guam, in accordance with the Organic Act of Guam, an act to add a new Article 13.3 to Chapter 1, Title 5, Guam Code annotated relative to adopting the implementation plan for payments for Guam World War II claims. General rules, the Zoom meeting is hosted by my staff and will mute all Zoom participants until called upon. Members of the committee and non-committee members will be allowed to pose a question to an individual testifying. Individuals testifying shall first be recognized by myself before speaking and begin by stating their name for record-keeping purposes. When called to speak, please ensure that you are unmuted. Questions and testimony shall be confined to the substance or nature of the agenda. Personal inference as to the character or the motive of any senator or any individual testifying is not permitted. Any violation of this general rule of conduct will result in removal from the virtual public hearing. Please ensure that your video remains on throughout the hearing. Participants must be visible at all times and not engaged in any other activity during the hearing. Failure to maintain visibility may cause your removal from the meeting live stream. My colleagues and for the folks that are be testifying, please stay visible. And if you're having a drink or a snack, you will not be removed from the meeting live stream. I'd like to thank my colleagues for attending this afternoon's hearing. We have, let me see, I have Senator Frank Blas, Senator Antonio Ada, Madam Speaker Therese Terlaje, Senator Terlaje, Senator Joanne Brown, and we have folks from the administration. And to provide any opening, I have nothing other than the rules of engagement. I would have Mr. Byrne please speak about the bill submitted to us, the plan for the payment of the World War II claims. Mr. Byrne, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Edward Byrne, Director of the Department of Administration. And with me today is my deputy, Bernie Guinness, who is also heavily involved in making sure this program runs smoothly, and Leo Candasso for the Benefits Department of the DOA, who is most involved in making sure that this program runs smoothly. Leo was involved in the first war claims payout, which I think all can agree went very, very smoothly. This particular bill addresses those who got left out of that available payout because of two reasons. One, they were they effectively missed the date for the application to the federal commission that's responsible for paying out war claims. And there are a number of reasons why people might have missed that date. But unfortunately, even though they are obviously as eligible as those who did apply and succeeded to being registered, they, for several reasons that may or may not be their fault, they unfortunately did miss the date. And also there's a second class of people who are descendants of those who were entitled to war claims, and they are also a subject of this bill. The war claims are a very touchy subject. I think I testified before on the original war claims bill, that this is the first time that I can remember where a nation who was oppressed was forced to pay out their own war claims on behalf of their own war claimants, rather than the aggressive party that caused the reason for the war claims to arise in the first place. Nevertheless, we're trying to do the right thing here and pay out those who suffered and are deserving of some kind of compensation. I don't think anybody really thinks that this amount of money compensation or any amount of monetary compensation will be adequate compensation for those who suffered during the years of occupation and suffered some physical, emotional, and every other kind of hurt that you could possibly imagine. But we're here today to try and make that a little bit better, and hopefully we will. The bill before you, the administration has worked with the legislature to put it together, but we would like to make a slight amendment in that the administrative officer mentioned in the bill, which at the moment is the Committee on Decolonization, should in fact be the Director of Administration, because the administration of the claim from registration to payment is going to be done by the Department of Administration. The goal is that Guam Museum eventually will be the repository of the documentation relating to these claims, and that is also covered in the bill, and we would not seek to change that because that is the right place for it. In short, this is a bill to try and recognize the unrecognizable, to try and compensate for something that can't be compensated for, but let's try and do what we can, even at this late hour, and it's 77 years after these events stopped occurring. And that's a long time. In many other parts of the world, unfortunately, other conflicts have arisen which have outshadowed some of the atrocities of the Second World War. But let's see what we can do here between us all together to try and put right what we can and provide some claims in compensation for those who deserve it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, and thank you, Mr. Byrne. I'm looking at any of your folks that are present, but moving along, since you basically are representing all of them, and then my colleagues, if they have any questions for them, they'll identify them. Senator Blas, Frank Blas, do you have any questions for the folks present today?
First off, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a pretty lengthy document, if you ask me, and to be able to look through all of this. Mr. Chair, I would like to reserve for questions for later on. I'm still going through this documentation.
Yes, sir. I agree with you. It's a lengthy document. I think I may want to pose just one simple real question to Mr. Byrne. Mr. Byrne, does this basically or generally reflect how the federal government's program was set up? And maybe you can comment that and can give some light to this while we're still looking through it. It is quite lengthy.
Yes, it is a lengthy document, and thank you. I will answer your question, Mr. Chairman. The part of the bill that deals with the actual claimants, yes, does mirror the federal rules and regulations, and is designed to, as I mentioned, it's designed to include in the compensatory group those who missed the date for registering with the Federal Claims Commission. The part of the bill that deals with descendants is a different matter altogether, and wasn't covered in the federal payout, but is being covered in this one for a number of reasons. But as the bill says, we have to pay out the actual claimants first, and that's going to be our first duty.
Thank you, sir. Senator Ada, do you have any questions you'd like to pose to Mr. Byrne or any of his staff? Tony?
No, Mr. Chair, I just agree with my colleague that, this is a lengthy document, and perhaps, well, maybe, Mr. Byrne, if you will, when the bill passes, how long do you think it would take for the department to pay out its first check?
I've done a lot of talking, so I'm going to ask my staff to talk about that. But there are time frames in the bill, but to the greatest extent possible, that depends upon the actual commission to make a decision, and we're dependent on that. But please, any of my either my deputy or Leo, please step in if you think you can help to. Help the senator with this question.
I can go ahead and chime in. So yes, the director was correct. It really just depends on the adjudication commission when they approve it. So the process we did was when we got it from the federal government, it would come to DOA, we will review, take a second review at it, verify. And once we vet everything, then we will send it up to accounting to pay out. From the time we receive it and we get the final approval from the federal government, it took out maybe about 2 weeks, 1 to 2 weeks, depending on how many claims we received in, because we were sending it up in batches. It was just easier to administer between benefits branch and the accounting division to send it on batches. So it would take anytime between a week to 2 weeks from the date that the employee benefits branch receives it with final approval.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, being that this is a lengthy document and this is the holiday season, maybe perhaps if need be, that we do have a second hearing prior to reporting the bill out, if there are any additional questions after this this hearing, and perhaps maybe they'll be able to answer any other concerns that we may have. Otherwise, we may be able to just push it forward into our next session agenda.
Yes, sir, and you're right. It is lengthy. I will seriously consider. I'll be meeting with the committee and with the administration, finding out. I just don't. But we'll discuss it as we're moving.
Yeah, we don't need to make any delays, but just in the event that there are other questions that may need to be answered that hasn't been answered, then maybe we can just have maybe a roundtable or something prior to the bill going on to the floor.
All right. Thank you, Senator Ada.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's the only question I have. Thank you.
Senator, if you have any questions, of course, we'll be happy to answer them, and we can put them on our website so everybody can see them. I don't mean to curtail any discussion, but if we can answer something quickly, we will. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you, Senator Ada. Madam Speaker, do you have any questions you would like to pose to the administration on the work claims?
Yeah. So just one, we didn't hear from the Department of Chamorro Affairs, who's going to be, according to this bill, the lead agency on this, but they're also a member of the commission. Is there any, do you find, Mr. Juan Pat Borja, that there would be any issue in that? Being the adjudicator and the administrator also?
Yes, Melvin.
Speaker and senators. Yeah, we in principle, we believe that the Guam Museum is a great fit for the processing. But it's I think it provides an excellent space and venue for our applicants. However, I do think that it is appropriate for I would suggest that the Department of Administration, given their experience running the first round of claims, that they play lead on the administration, but that doesn't mean that we are unwilling to host the effort at the Guam Museum. I think the Guam Museum remains an ideal venue My only concern really is the challenges that it presents to our staff and, you know, our limited expertise in processing claims.
Madam Speaker?
Yes. But it is this commission that will be processing the claims, right? The commission hosted by the Guam Museum.
Madam Speaker, if I could help. In my opening remarks, I mentioned that the administration is asking for an amendment to the bill that the Department of Administration will be the administrative, and the Director of Administration in particular will be the administrative officer responsible for the administration of the claims. The Commission will adjudicate the claims. The Department of Administration hopes to act as it did previously with the federal war claims, is that we will process them, prepare them for submission to the Commission, and process them after they've been adjudicated by the Commission.
So does that mean that the confidential documents are going to be submitted to the Department of Administration and not to the Guam Museum?
Initially, they will go to the Department of Administration. They will end up, and because that is the purpose of the Guam Museum, they will end up when finally adjudicated and paid out at the Guam Museum.
All right, so yeah, we need some clarifications, because first of all, the bill talks about the public documents will of course be the property of the Guam Museum, but those are the public parts, and there are confidential parts of this adjudication process. And I thought it was very clear in the prior bill that that was going to be handled by this adjudication committee. And if that adjudication is going to be like this confidential documents and all of that going to be handled at Department of Administration, yeah, that's a big change in this from the original bill that authorized it, right? Where exactly are you recommending that change, Mr. Byrne?
I don't have the exact page, but I think it refers to the appointment of an administrative officer, and that, I think it's at the top of page 2, if I remember rightly, although you might not have the same pagination as I do. That the administrative officer will be the Director of Administration. And I assure you that we will treat these documents with equal confidentiality that we did when we were processing its federal counterpart.
I don't see that part of the bill, but I will look better. But so attached to the bill from the governor was also an implementation plan schedule that talks about the Department of Administration's role. And I was going to ask, because it says here that the DOA Employees Benefits Branch will serve as secondary reviewer of all approved claims. Upon satisfaction by the Employee Benefits Branch, approved claims will be forwarded to DOA. Any claims not meeting the secondary review will be returned to the committee in its entirety for further action. The adjudication and all the consideration of all those documents is supposed to be done by this committee. So when this says that the Employee Benefits Branch can and reject an approved claim, you know, I just want to get some clarification of that, because I don't think we're supposed to, it's calling it like a secondary reviewer as opposed to a processor of the claims that have already been reviewed and approved. Okay,
I'm prepared to tackle that, but Leo, why don't you perhaps speak about that, because you were the one that was doing this work under the previous claim.
Director. So for clarification, in terms of, so part of the documentation that's required, which we actually didn't see, and I guess this is specific to your concern about just the confidentiality in terms of details that they're putting in and on their testimonies. So the employee benefits branch, we didn't see that information. When we talk about being the second reviewer, meaning upon when it's approved, the documents will come to us, and we're talking about just documentation in terms of identification, just that it went through the first review process, it went to the second review process, and then they validated like the committee because they would assign based on the testimony a $10, $12, or $15,000 payout, right? So we would review and make sure that all those documents are there and prepared for us to go ahead and send it up to the Division of Accounts and Pay. But for your concern, I think, which I believe you were addressing to earlier, is that we didn't see the information, the details of what the claimant was putting in terms of what they experienced during the war. Those documents were not furnished to the employee benefits branch. So it was all approved from, in this terms, it'll be the adjudication committee that will get all those details. And then from then they will decide what amount to pay out.
Right. Okay.
Is that addressing your concern?
Yeah. So maybe just one more. Yeah. So they review it. The committee reviews it. They review all the confidential documents. They approve it, and then they send the approval to you. So what will you be reviewing besides the approval document itself? If you're not going to be looking at the underlying docs, right? Hopefully the affidavits and stuff.
Right. So there are documents that we attached to the plan, right? There were exhibits that were attached to the plan. So those are the type of exhibits that we would be looking at to make sure.
Statement of claim. Well, the statement of claim is where they put all that information. Yeah. So you're going to be reviewing that as well. Those are where they put their stories.
Basically, yeah. Well, on the first go round, we didn't see that. So that was not given to us.
Right. But you're saying now the statement of claim, that's the confidential doc I'm talking about. Exhibit B is a beneficiary designation. I don't think that's as confidential except for, of course, social security numbers and things. But, and then, so the proposed decisions also you're going to be seeing. Because right now we don't have access to these from the Federal War Claims Commission. We don't get to see all the decisions that they've made. We don't see the applications that were submitted. And yeah, so I just want to be very clear which ones are being treated confidentially and which ones will not be. And I think we should treat the same, treat them the same. Whatever was confidential before should be confidential for our own local process. Yeah. That's all. I mean, I trust that you guys are going to process, whether these two things match, I guess, whether the award matches the check or I'm not sure what, but to review whether the award was proper or not, that's the part I guess I'm having an issue with, if we are relying on a committee or commission to do that. And then again,
yes. Madam Speaker, if I could give you some examples of the things that we had to do under the previous war claims. There were issues from time to time with beneficiaries and who was a beneficiary and who wasn't a beneficiary. We had incomplete notary documentation. That kind of administrative job is what we were faced with fixing, even though the claim had been adjudicated under the federal committee.
Right. So as I said, the beneficiary forms, I don't have issue with being, that you guys are going to look at that to prove that that is the beneficiary. It's just the statements of claim because that's where all the other information is put on. Okay, I guess we'll clarify that moving forward. So my only other question, of course, regarding this bill is the funding again. And so when we had passed the LEAP bill, we had calculated from the 62 down using, what obligations we had. And we had also calculated for this war claims to be 10 million. But, and then at that time, I guess, Mr. Byrne, we went through it with the previous bills as to if we counted up all the obligations that we are making through these bills, we want to make sure we have enough for these war claims for sure. And the 10 million was just an estimate based on really no real way to know how many missed the deadline. We have no way of knowing that. Somebody guessed 700, but it was a guess. That's maybe people who contacted, certain, but I think there may be more than that. We really don't know. And so I just want to make sure, what do we have available? But if we have $20 million, well, during committee of the whole, you testified that there was a $20 million balance, general fund balance for FY21, or that's what you estimated. And the CRE are showing a $62 million excess revenues, right? But the funds are only 20 million. And then we supposedly have a $19 million right now excess for 2022. But yeah, how would you reconcile the 62 million paper excess we have versus the 20 million in cash general fund balance? And then we're supposed to have a 19 million FY22 balance. Is the general fund balance numbers the same as you testified before, 20 million for FY21?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My view hasn't changed because it's basically only a few days, and in response to the previous fields, the answer was the same: is that we are still working through the financial statements like any other enterprise. It takes time to finalize financial statements, but my best estimate, based upon what I know and what I estimate, and if I can refer you to our audited financial statements, accounting financial statements contain a lot of estimates. We say that in there, and the auditors acknowledge that financial statements include estimates. But based on what we know now, there are going to be, because you asked me this directly, and I said yes, that there's going to be sufficient funds to pay out 10 million in war claims. Yes, we don't know what the final number will be. And I believe, in answer to your question, that the 700 or thereabouts came from a question we posed to the federal government as to the claims that they had but rejected because they were too late. That doesn't include those who actually never made a claim, and that's why it's an unknown.
It's likely to be higher, right? If there were 700 known claims, not adjudicated.
Yeah. Yes.
Potentially more. All right.
Yes, it's possible. I mean, I can't tell you that they actually validated the 700 because I believe when they found that it was out of date, they returned it without even looking at it. But you're right. I think it's more likely to be higher than lower. Right.
And this 10 million was based on an estimate of about $10,000 each. Yes. But Mr. Byrne, what about the general fund balance? I'm asking you if that 20 million estimate you gave us is still good.
Yes, it's the best estimate, based upon all I know and experience. It's the best estimate I can give at the moment. I think I mentioned there are three elements that we have, three big elements, because there are some small elements that we have to take account of when we're closing fiscal 21. One is the continuing the fact that we have continuing appropriations. Two is the invoices, and it's a real headache for the accounting department, DOA. The invoices that suddenly appear from agencies, they're instructed to return the invoices timely and as quickly as possible, but for a number of reasons they don't do that. And the third is the need for the general fund to make up the deficit on the general funds and on the special funds. And there are a large number of special funds, but we know that in the 6 largest and most important special funds, there was a shortfall in revenues of about 20 million. So I'm including that in the amount that the general fund would have to make up for fiscal 21.
Is there any administrative fee that's going to be used here?
The bill provides for $500,000 for administrative fees, yes.
So where will that go? Will that go to the museum or to the Department of Administration?
I imagine it would go to both.
Melvin, are you aware, Mr. Wampat Borja? I'm talking to you, you're the head of the Department of Chamorro Affairs, which is the Guam Museum is under right now, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, my understanding is that if there is an amendment made to designate the Department of Administration as the administrative office, that the funding for administrative costs will go to DOA. But if we are going to host the application effort, that some of that funding will cover the cost of the facility, as well as the costs to house the or to process and house the documents that will be held in the archive. So the archive is technically physically at the Haga'hågan Library, the Nevis Flores Memorial Library. However, the archive is the jurisdiction of DCA.
How will you treat the confidential documents? Because some of them are public and we know what you should do with those, but what are you gonna do with the confidential ones?
That would have to be referred to legal counsel, but I imagine that anything that is confidential has to be processed a little differently. Our understanding is that government records need to be held and preserved in a single place. But if they do include the confidential information, I would imagine that those would have to be redacted.
Could I ask DOA how they treated their confidential documents from that first round of local payouts?
So the files that we received, Senator, basically we have them in a cabinet, in a locked cabinet within our office. I was even notating that maybe we need to transfer those files over collectively to the Guam Museum, so that it's all in one area. But what we have right now from the first go round is it's in the cabinet within our office it's basically locked.
All right, okay. Melvin, perhaps if you could consider that and give us your recommendation as to what should happen with those confidential files. Thank you. All right, thank you, Leonora. Thank you, PD Director and Director.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for those questions. And I'm going to ask Mr. Byrne and Mr. Borja, the amendments that are going to be proposed, and as my colleague Senator Blas, Senator Ada brought up, it's a lengthy document. I'm going to schedule another hearing with the amendments, because it's got to be a clean document so that the administration can actually move forward on the war claims. The document we're looking at right now, folks, it's not a clean document. You've got some amendments. So I like that the remaining of this hearing, that the amendments be proposed so that we can put it in. And then we're looking at the 30th of December, we'll have another hearing. It'll be at 9 a.m. So I'm making that announcement now. So we'll have another hearing on the 30th of December at 9 a.m. where we'll hear, hopefully, a clean document. Okay, Ed, Mr. Byrne, so if you can give us all your amendments so we can get it ready and we get it be heard, so that the changes that you recommended and Mr. Wadbus in support of and whoever, and to include all my colleagues. Okay, so from that, we're gonna move on now and I'd like to recognize also, we're joined by Senator Parrish, but we'll now move to Senator Brown. Ma'am, do you have any questions and any proposed amendments so we can annotate that today and then we can get it ready for the 30th of December, because this is a lengthy document. Yes, ma'am, you have the floor.
Very much so, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clarify on the language, just so for myself and for the general public, on page 6 on section 13306 on appropriation. We're saying here that the sum of $10 million is hereby appropriated from the general fund. So I'd like to know where in the general fund we're going to take that out. And this is to pay for the Department of Administration to pay certified claims to compensable Guam victims and survivors of compensable Guam descendants as duly adjudicated by the adjudication committee. So I just want to clarify that in terms of who are these compensatable survivors. Well, that's not an issue, but certainly who they're with regards to the victims and survivors. I just want to get that clarified. Is that one and the same, the Guam victims and survivors, the way that's worded? And then where exactly is the 10 million coming from? If I can direct that question to Department of Administration, to the director, where are we looking at this versus Section 30 funds?
Senator,
Mr. Mayor.
Section 30 funds are a special group of funding that we get from the federal government to compensate us for taxes paid to the federal government, but basically levied because the people upon whom they're levied, or the businesses upon whom they're levied are resident on Guam. So that's a separate amount that for fiscal 22 we've already received. It's then appropriated by the legislature as part of the appropriations of the general fund. But this particular bill is being appropriated from the general fund. It's an appropriation like any other appropriation, that if you took the budget bill apart, every appropriation effectively is expressed that way, except in the budget bill, because we're dealing with lots of different agencies. It's just divided up into a number of different sections. If I could, and please, I don't mean to keep on repeating what I said in respect to the previous two bills, but the way that the general fund works, it's the fund that has to bear the expenses of any fund that can't bear its own expenses. And as I just mentioned, special funds are showing a deficit, so the general fund has to make that up. That's not subject. It's not an appropriated amount. It's just an accounting fact that the general fund has to make up these deficits in the special fund. So although there isn't a source of revenues nominated in this bill, and that's something that's specific to the budget bill has to be balanced, and the budget bill has to specify a source of revenues in order to make the expenditure appropriatable, if there is such a word. But that's just the way the legislature has required the budget bill to be set up. This bill allows the sum to come from the general fund, as indeed other bills have done. And this is what we discussed at the LEAP bill. The same kind of wording is appropriate. So there is no necessarily there's no revenues to make this appropriation, but indeed I think this was the burden of the speaker's questions to me. Is there sufficient money in the general fund, either from a surplus from a previous year or an expected surplus in the current year? And the answer is yes.
Well, I bring this up. I mean, I understand the what you've explained, and I appreciate that. But, for me, it does matter where the money's coming from. This whole idea of and again, I have no objections to paying. Certainly our World War II survivors that did not meet the deadline, because certainly they're as deserving as anyone else, more so of receiving their share of the compensation. But I am concerned about where the money comes from, because this idea that we are having essentially the descendants of victims of World War II pay compensation, World War II compensation to themselves, to me is bothersome. It does matter where the money's coming from. This idea that we're just simply going to pay money out of the general fund and that's going to be the source of funding does not, to me, fully bring to light what it is that we're paying compensation for with regards to these claims. I understand the fact that the federal government set their own deadline. I mean, that's the reality that we're here having to deal with. But nevertheless, moving forward, I do have a concern. I would rather have that source come from the federal government. I'd rather have that source come from Section 30 funds than it is at least coming from the federal government versus the expectation that the people of Guam, many who are descendants of those that were victimized during the war, are being now asked to pay this money because this is money otherwise it would come to our people for other things, be it to run our educational systems, our police department, our other social services that we provide in this government to our people. And so I do want to raise that concern, Mr. Chair, because it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to do that. I mean, compensation for the atrocities of the war should come from the federal government. And I'd like that money to be directly connected to the federal government, because to ask our own people, including those, like I said, many of us are all descendants of victims and those that were survived these atrocities, some who didn't survive the atrocities of World War II, are being asked to pay themselves. And that to me just doesn't fall in line with the recognition of that. It should come from the federal government. So I will obviously raise, as I am now, the objection that this come from the general fund. If we've already expended all the Section 30 money that's come in the latter part of this year, then I would prefer to look at language where that money's connected to a federal source if we're going to do this for our people, because it just does not fall in line with the intention. And are we asking for our grandchildren to pay for it? To me, that is the wrong message. That's the wrong direction that we're telling our people. This was an injustice that was brought upon our people. So to ask our people to be the ones to pay this compensation is not morally right. It's not ethically right. Because we simply want to pay and tell our people of Guam, we're paying you. You're being paid. It's not right. It does matter where the money's coming from. If we had the source of Section 30 that the government of Guam is receiving, I probably will have no argument for that. That I would rather see, because then at least I know the source is directly from the federal government. If we're going to do this to try to correct what has been an injustice, I don't want to create another injustice. And to ask the victims, the descendants of victims, to pay themselves. And I know that has also been discussed in looking at paying the descendants of those that have since passed away since the war. It's just wrong. It's ethically and morally wrong to do that. To ask the victims and descendants of victims to pay themselves is wrong, because we literally are taking money off the table of our children and our grandchildren. And that's not right. I certainly wouldn't see my grandparents want to do that for their descendants, because they're no longer here. We can no longer correct the injustice of what they suffered, because they've since, as many of our people have since passed away, because it's taken so many years to recognize the injustice that has been brought upon our people. It's an injustice that the US federal government has chosen to absorb from the government in Japan. Therefore, to me, they remain responsible. But to simply say we're going to pay this out from the hands of our own people is wrong. So I do want to relay that, Mr. Chair, but I also want to further clarify the language here with regards to what exactly is meant with regards to the Guam victims and survivors of compensable Guam decedents as duly adjudicated by the adjudication committee. Who exactly are these individuals that we're talking about with this language? Can we clarify that in simple English so I and the rest of our community can understand exactly what that means?
Mr. Byrne, do you have an answer to that question?
I'm sorry, I'm not really clear what the question is, but as I indicated when I was asked to speak at the introduction of this bill, is that there are two classes of people who will benefit under this legislation if passed. Those that were survivors, and I think the words victims and survivors mean that
Mr. Byrne,
they have to be, yes.
Ed Boss, I think she wanted to know who are the members of the commission.
No, I want to understand. No, Mr. Chair, I want to clarify what exactly is meant by the way this is worded. Guam victims and survivors of compensable Guam decedents as duly adjudicated. What exactly? Who is this? Who are we talking about when you say these words? Guam victims and survivors. And who are the Guam decedents? Who exactly? In simple English, because even me, I mean, I think I can read English, but you know, this isn't as clear
right.
to me as probably the language should be. I don't know what exactly are we saying here. So can we clarify that for myself and others that
All right.
don't
There you
understand
go,
this
Ed.
version of English?
Let me try and address this, right? The two classes, I'll try and simplify it as I understand it as much as I can, right? It's to pay certified claims to compensable Guam victims, right? Those are the people in the class that were alive during the atrocities, but because they were late in submitting their claim to the federal government, they weren't compensated under the federal government program. And survivors of compensable descendants are the surviving people, because I think that there was an attempt here to make sure that only survivors of people who suffered the atrocities, i.e. their descendants of those who suffered atrocities, but were unable to register their claim because they died before the date on which the federal claims program was opened. So there maybe a comma might have helped there, but they're the survivors of compensable decedents, right? So I hope that clarifies.
So is
your
this
question.
intended language now opening up beyond just the remaining survivors that are still here that did not meet the deadline now? Or is it, I know that was also raised that there are those survivors that filed for this ground, but however may have passed away and had not been paid? Or is it that, or is it just everyone who is a descendant of an individual who has since passed, who suffered through the war, but has since passed away? Are we opening it up, even in spite of the correction we made to the legislation, to just simply have it to those that are survivors?
Well, I think the answer is in section 13302 that sets it out in slightly longer detail, that talks about a compensable Guam victim, and the compensable Guam victim are those who should have been compensated, but for reasons associated with the federal program weren't, and survivors of compensable Guam decedents, who are the remainder of people who are the descendants of those who are survivable compensable decedents. You will have to
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I mean, I think if you wish to narrow the definition to those who made a claim but weren't paid out because they unfortunately died in the interim, then you'd have to change that language. These are compensable. These are descendants of compensable decedents. So these are the people that are basically the children and grandchildren of those who would have been compensated had they not died before the program was initiated.
So is the intent of the administration now to open this up to those descendants that have, that their parents or grandparents have since passed away after the war? Is that the intent? I just want to clarify this, because $10 million isn't going to cover anywhere near that. And $10 million from the general fund, which is bothersome to me to begin with as a source of funding. Is that what the administration's coming back now and saying? Is they're opening the door to this with this $10 million? Because that's a lot of people. It's going to be way beyond $10 million if that's the policy call. But I just want to clarify: is this the policy call the administration is making?
Yes, but the compensable survivors have to be paid out first.
Oh, so then this is intended then not to do those that have since passed away in the interim since they filed. This is to open up to all those that have since died since World War II, that they or their heirs now will be eligible to be compensated for their suffering.
Yes,
that's
but
what
as
is
I
here.
say,
This is not simply
the priority is to pay out survivors. And that's
No, I understand, but I don't recall that with the bill we passed for the administration to come back and give us the plan on how they were going to implement it. When we changed the language, there was an error from what the legislature sent originally. You know, we corrected that. So, but now the administration's including in their version that they want to open it up. Is that what's being told to us here with this language?
that's what the language says.
Interesting. Well, 10 million isn't going to do it. And Mr. Chair, like I said, I raised the objection. If this is coming from a federal source, which to me, ethically and morally, that money should come from the hands of the federal government. But to do this, to simply tell our people, we're compensating you, but we're taking it off the plate of your children and your grandchildren and all the current services we're providing to the people of Guam, I don't think is right. To ask our people to compensate themselves for atrocities that were brought upon them is not right. And certainly if we're going to open this up, then let's have a bigger discussion on where's the real money going to come from, because $10 million really isn't much of anything that's going to even come anywhere near addressing the number of people that would be eligible with this type of language. And more importantly, I don't want the remaining survivors to be held back. We should prioritize and let's get through that bridge first. Let's get those people paid out first. Because this bigger debate and the lack of funding to genuinely address what ultimately, and I don't even know, but I know it's going to be way beyond $10 million. If that is indeed the policy decision that's going to be made by the legislature and signed into law, that everyone else who has since passed away, and trust me, we all have relatives. My grandparents have since passed away that would be eligible, as I'm sure for many on the island. But I want to know where the money's coming from. More importantly, I want to make sure it's coming from federal hands to our people, not from our people to themselves. Like I said, I really truly believe that would be ethically and morally wrong to have our people pay themselves for their own atrocities. Then we're just paying out money for the sake of paying out money. And I don't think that's right. So with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you to Mr. Burns for responding to my questions and the opportunity to comment on this bill.
Yes. Thank you, Senator Brown. And I agree with you. It should come from the federal government, the United States government. Should not come from us or for any of our, even our Section 30. Senator Tello, do you have any questions for the folks in the administration? Ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is in the or the rules that you provided, is there anything in there that provides a deadline as well? I mean, we're here because of a deadline that was not able to be reached for some people, but is there anything in the rules and regs talking of a deadline there? How long are we going to keep this open for individuals?
Yes, there is. I'll ask my staff to respond.
So I did not see any deadline here. I was looking for that, just like the first round, there was a deadline for those to file, at least from and I really just got the amended version yesterday. I did not see a deadline on this one.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I think that's something you mentioned earlier, Mr. Chair, that on the 30th, you'll have another public hearing regarding this bill. And I think, you know, I think we need to address that. You know, if there's any plans of having any kind of roundtable even before that with the administration and senators invited, all senators invited to talk about that, about a deadline to incorporate into these rules. That might be something you might consider as well.
Yes, Senator Tello, I'm very concerned about that. That's why I mentioned the 30 December, because my understanding is the bill that was passed, and that's why we have the rules. It's got to be approved or disapproved by January 7th. And then I'm very concerned. I want to make sure that the rules are at least satisfactory to all of us, other than the source of funding.
Right.
We want to take care of whatever we can take care of. Okay, that's why.
As well. You did mention, Mr. Chair, to try and mention things right now in this public hearing so that whatever is incorporated can be placed in there, so it's a clean bill. So the deadline is one. Also, in the event that funding, the 10 million, you're putting a cap, and it's obvious that it was a guesstimate, you know, with regards to 700, and that only came from the federal government. I'm sure there's additional amount of people there. So we need to also address that cap. We also need to address, Mr. Chair, to ensure that this funding, like the intent, and for the record, I introduced legislation for the war claims prior to this bill, and it talked about using Section 30 funding to pay this, knowingly that once all the other war claims have been adjudicated and it was through, that there would be additional funding. So Mr. Byrne, can you tell me, after all the funds were paid, or the Treasury was paid out, it was, if you can explain from the beginning, after a certain amount of funding of Section 30 money, like I think it was 65 million, anything above that Guam makes in Section 30 money would be going to the treasurer to pay for the war claims. And can you tell us, I'm probably giving you a wrong number there, but can you tell us, was it just this year, FY22, fiscal year FY22, where we now receive all Section 30 money, and how much additional funding was that? I'm sorry for confusing you, Mr. Burns. If I did, I can try and simplify it again.
No, I think I get you.
Okay, thank you.
But if I may suggest you look at it the other way around.
Yes.
The Section 30 funding, as I indicated before, is money that the federal government has taxes, so the federal government has earned, but relate to individuals and businesses who are resident on Guam. They actually effectively pay that back to us because it was earned by federal employees and other federal taxes as a result of either employment or business on Guam. And that's been of the order for several years of somewhere between 70 and 80 million. The way it works is the US Treasury estimates the amount that it should be for a particular year based on historical numbers. They pay us an estimated amount. And as the actual numbers come in from the IRS and DRT, that number gets adjusted to an actual number, usually like 3 or 4 years after the effective date. Mm-hmm. So we're now reconciling Section 30 monies that happened in 2009 and 10, right, basically. The federal government, because they had no other funding source for this, if you recall, it was somewhat carefully debated in Congress. The federal government determined that there was no other funding source because they didn't have an appropriation to pay these funds, but to effectively restrict the amount of Section 30 funds. And I believe it was something like 42 million is what they estimated to be the amount they were going to pay out under this program. So for, I think it was 3 years, they reduced our Section 30 fund receipts in order to make up this amount. So, it's not really the federal government that's paying for it. It's again, it was a deduction from the money which we would otherwise have received, and therefore it's actually kind of local funds that are paying for this.
Mr. Byrne, what is the cap that was given for Section 30 money, the cap?
If I may just finish that.
Sure, sure. Oh, okay.
So the money that we received in September 21 for fiscal 22 was on the face of it, the first time we've received for 3 or 4 years where there wasn't a deduction for this war claims funding. And I think I mentioned that if I remember correctly, that the total amount that was estimated that the federal government had to claw back, if you like, was something like 42 million.
Yes, you mentioned that. Right. So what was the cap again, Mr. Byrne? So Guam in Section 30 funding for the next amount of years would only get 60, or I think it's like 60, if you can correct me, 60 million, and then anything above that shall go to the Treasury. And they'll be doing that every year until they reach this 42 million, or what's been adjudicated.
Yeah, that, if I may, that's
what
what
was the
happened
cap?
in the past. It's
Yeah.
not, there's no cap. It's whatever, the gross amount is whatever the calculation by US Treasury for the payments that they owe to us under this Section 30 would have been. And then they effectively deducted money. They took money out of that pot and paid
Right.
it to themselves to pay these claims.
Right,
But
every year for the last how many years?
for about the last 3 or 4 years.
3 or 4 years. And when they did that, right, if I'm not mistaken, they made sure they didn't go over a certain amount, or not a certain amount. They made sure that Guam received X amount, and that anything above that went to Treasury. So they kind of estimate, and I keep thinking in my head, it was anything above 60 million in Section 30 funding, that money will go to the Treasury. Now, in FY 2022 budget that we just passed, we found a lot more, funding in Section 30 money, because they no longer took any money out for war claims, no longer. So where I'm getting here, Mr. Burns, is that as we look at this legislation and pay out those who missed the deadline, and we're looking at Section 30 funding and how long it'll take to pay out these war claims. Has the administration thought about a formula in which they're going to use so that, we can still meet payroll, we could still meet the expenses of the government of Guam? And have they looked into that with respect to pulling out of Section 30 money? Because, and this process also, I think Senator Ada had asked the question, when do you think we can start the process on this? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that time frame. So let's go to the first question. Has the administration come up with a formula using Section 30 money?
No, Senator, because it's, as I say, it was the other way around. The Section 30 money, we would have got 100%. The federal government said, but we need to hold back because we have no other source for it, 42 million. So that's what they did withhold. And rather than, I don't think there was a formal approach to this, rather than holding back 42 million in 1 year, they spread it over I think it was like 3.5 years. They spread it over 3.5 years. So, but I don't think there was a formal calculation. They just said, because the number kept on changing, because they themselves, when they started this program, didn't know exactly how much they were going to spend. So they kept on changing the formula for each year and holding back these funds until this year we finally, on the face of it, we paid back everything that got paid out by the federal government in war claims, and therefore we got the full amount of the Section 30 funds. So
Right.
it's
Okay.
not.
I'm not gonna...
It's kind of the other way around from the way you were expressing it.
Right. Well, for simplicity reasons, Mr. Chair, I won't linger on this. I'm not getting the answer I am, because I know there was a cap. The legislature worked within that cap for the last 3 budgets because we weren't anticipating the full Section 30 because it was paying out the war claims. So I'll get that number myself. I know there was a cap on it. What I'm getting at too is a formula in which the administration needs to, let us know what their intention is. And like I said, the government still needs to keep the lights on, and pay payroll and keep the government running. And it may take a little bit longer to pay out these war claims than anticipated for the public. And so that being said, Mr. Chair, I think everyone has asked all the other questions, and unfortunately some of the answers were not clear, but It is what it is, right? That's what they keep saying.
And we'll
No,
see you on December 30th.
right, it is. I might be doing it from off island, but I will definitely participate. If there's any other questions, Mr. Chair, that I have or amendments that I'd like to proffer, I'll send it to your office, within the next day at the soonest, just for, clarity. So thank you, Mr.
Right.
Chair. Merry Christmas to
Right.
everyone here. Bernadine and Lenore, thank you so much. And of course, Mr. Wampat, for your time. Merry Christmas to you all. Mr. Burns as well.
Thank you, Senator Tello. Senator Sabina Burns, ma'am, do you have any questions for the panel?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, before I go into the bill, the details of the bill, Mr. Byrne, if you can kind of clarify how much money's left in the Treasury account that is for claims that already have been adjudicated but haven't been paid out? Is there still money in the Treasury account? Sorry, can't hear.
Sorry, it occasionally just mutes itself. I apologize. That's the money the Treasury, the federal government deals with. They don't tell us that amount.
Okay, so how long are they keeping that account open? So for those that were adjudicated under the Guam World War II Loyalty Recognition Act, how many are, you don't have any numbers on that?
We don't have any numbers, Senator. All we know is they had a deadline in 2018. I don't believe, and Leo, you might remember this, I don't believe that the Foreign Settlement Commission has actually met on Guam lately. So on the face of it, they may have paid out everything, but that's entirely a matter for them.
Okay, and so when do they consider it? Are they going to close it? I mean, is there like a timeline where they'll revert all that money back to Gov Guam, or are they going to keep it open? Do you have any details on that?
I don't, because I don't know. We had a discussion earlier about the confidentiality of documents. They're not available to us. When we were paying out the previous war claims, we were relying upon those the documentary claims, other than the issues with beneficiaries that Leo spoke about. It was entirely the matter for the federal government, and they adjudicated the claim, and they told us which claims they had adjudicated, but they didn't tell us which or why or who was paid out and who wasn't.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm not interested in those details. I'm just more interested in whether the money would be available to those that have yet to, get the claim. That's my concern. It's not the details of who got it. But okay, and if you have any information, I appreciate that. So in regards to this bill, there is a part where it talks about eligibility, right? And can you clarify what would make somebody ineligible for this?
Leo, do you want to go into that? I think it's spelled out in the proposed rules, but maybe you want to talk about that, Leo, or Bernie, right?
So basically, it's anyone who I guess was around during the war, resident of Guam. I mean, I haven't seen anyone that was deemed illegible. It was just a matter of what threshold or what payout the federal government was approving for them based on their testimony or based on the statement. But in terms of eligibility.
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Basically that they were living or they were around during the World War II, during the war and the Japanese occupation. So that would determine eligibility. And then from then on, they would provide testimony on what they endured. And then from there, the federal government will identify what amount will be paid out.
If I remember correctly, we had some claimants who, when they produced their documents, were born after Liberation Day, and therefore obviously were deemed ineligible for this benefit because they can't, by definition, have been a victim.
Okay. So yeah, the other thing is it's up to the adjudication committee, right? A lot of it So I'm looking at this section 13.304. And so basically a lot of this relies on the adjudication committee by majority vote. So yeah, should the individual not get the vote, there is a process for appeals. And so my concern is that the appeals is the very same adjudication committee. Is that what is listed in this bill? Is that correct?
That's what's listed in the rules and regulations. And again, I believe that mirrors the procedure that was adopted by the federal government. The Foreign Claims Settlement Commission was both the adjudicator and the appellant body.
So would it be the exact same people that made the decision that would hear the appeal?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know if were there different procedures for the appeal process? Or would it be just like a duplication of the hearing, the initial claim review?
Well, if there were additional information that the claimant had, I'm sure they would introduce that additional information at the appeal process. But the way that it usually works is that any adjudicating body will make a judgment and then explain the steps they took to reach that judgment. And if there was some error in that process, that would be the grounds for appeal. And I imagine, although as I say, we weren't privy and we weren't consulted, and it isn't anything that we have any insight to how the federal government processed this whole amount. We just dealt with the results.
Okay, so perhaps there might be some improvement there, more refining. I think a refinement of that piece could be useful because just to make the process fair. The section 13.308, where it talks about limited compensation for provision of representational services. And so basically it caps, if someone's representing a war claim survivor, it caps the amount that they can receive at 1%. Do you see this in the federal procedures? Is this something that's seen in the federal procedures too?
Yes, I don't remember the exact amount, Senator, but there was a similar provision in the federal process.
Okay, and then subsection B, it talks about compensation in excess of the amount allowed, and that person can be fined $5,000, not more than $5,000, or imprisoned not more than 1 year, or both. Was this also present in the federal rules?
Yes, again, I don't remember the exact numbers, and I'll certainly look it up, but there was a punitive provision in the federal process.
So how would someone get an excess amount if the committee is the one that's deciding on the amount?
Well, but there are several levels of benefit. Leo, do you want to weigh in on that?
In terms of benefits, in terms of the amount that they were approved for payout, the 10, 12, and 15, is that what you're referring to?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. So there's different benefits. So depending on, I guess the front line is at 10,000. Basically, if you were forced to march, and then there's different levels. If you had a dismemberment of the body, rape would be one of those. Paralysis. Those are different levels on the tier and how they would determine the payout. And I'm looking for the section.
But we'll maybe, Senator, we can get that information to you. But that would be a reason why somebody might get paid more than they were entitled to, is that they made a claim at a level higher than they were actually entitled to by the facts.
Okay, that seems kind of questionable to me, because it's the adjudication committee that's deciding this. So it doesn't make sense they would find somebody for an award that they themselves have agreed to. So I don't see how that would come about. Maybe if you can clarify that at some point. think those are my questions so far, but I'm sure if I look through the document a little bit more, I might be able to come up with more questions. So I'll do reserve that for another time. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the panel for your responses.
Thank you, Senator Paris.
Mr. Chair, if I
Mr. Byrne.
Oh.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, just one real quick question to Melvin. It's real quick and it's probably, I'd like to ask Mel if he thinks that the implementation plan will be effective by default on June 6th.
I'm sorry, Senator, can you repeat the question for what?
So Mel, do you think that the implementation of the plan, this plan, will be effective by default on June 6th? If we don't address it and it automatically, is effective by June 6th, which is the date.
This dispense as a senator, I don't think that this question necessarily pertains to me or the Department of Tomorrow Affairs in the sense that we're kind of going to be the host. If the suggested amendment goes through and Department of Administration becomes the administrator of the claims, we're going to be the house, so the venue. In that sense, we're prepared to mobilize as quickly as possible. But I can't predict for you what the timeline will be on the execution.
Okay, no, it's not the execution. I think you misunderstood me. It's just the implementation.
Sorry.
The plan, if the plan, because it's required. But anyways,
so are you asking if the Guam Museum will be prepared to house it and stand it up?
No. No, what I'm asking is about because of the way the bill was written, the original bill that passed in the legislature to require these regulations, and that it has to be passed by a certain time. I think the deadline is January 6th. So my question is, if the legislature, right, Mr. Chair, if the legislature does not act on this proposed implementation plan, do you feel that it will automatically come into play by default, be implemented?
I definitely think that the sooner we're able to push this through and stand it up, the better. This is not a simple or quick process by any stretch. So the more time that we have to get everything in order and to start receiving the applications and processing, I think the better.
Okay, still not answering my question. Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know what I'm trying to say, Mr. Chair, right?
Yes.
Okay,
yes, Senator Tello. And my colleagues, please understand, number one, the bill was passed. I wasn't present, neither was the speaker. The bill passed. The deadline is by January 7th. Pass, approve, or disapprove. That's why I've identified 30 December. So my colleagues, get me your amendments. Administration, get me your amendments. I need that in within the next, less than 30 minutes. That's why I announced it publicly. We're having another hearing on December 30th. So we need to wrap this up, because the longer it takes us, I need to get those amendments to my office. Like, this is what everybody should be concentrating. So right now we're going to end, and we will begin. We'll have a December 30th. Yes, Madam Speaker, you have something? Otherwise, we need to end, because when the clock is ticking all against everybody.
I just want to point out that, so the law that they're acting upon by submitting this plan said that they shall submit an implementation plan, and if we fail to act, it shall be deemed adopted, right? But however, if you look at this plan, the plan is a bill. So attached to it is an implementation plan schedule. Now that looks more like what we expect to see a plan, right? The details and all of that, like when they're going to do what and who does what, DOA versus Guam Museum. However, but this bill, I cannot imagine that this bill is going to go into effect by default, because this bill is appropriating $10 million from the general fund, which is contrary to what the original bill did, which was allowed transfer, or it allowed use of that, the War Claims Fund that's supposed to have money from the reimbursements from the federal government from the first batch, right? So yeah, that I too was concerned about that, but I'm thinking there's no way this is this would be a plan inconsistent with the current law, and I don't think that that's possible by default. So it would have to be something that is acted on. But thank you for the additional hearing. I think that's absolutely necessary. And okay, thank you. And I
Yes,
talked
thank you.
about days in here, deadlines. So yeah, I think that that should be clarified too, the deadlines.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And my colleagues, thank you for attending today's hearing. We will have another hearing, Mr. Byrne. Hopefully you're back by then. If not, I know you can Zoom in live, so, and you have your staff ready to go. As long as I get all the amendments today, yes, sir.
That might be the day, depending on what time you do it, that might be the day that I'm actually flying back. But maybe you and I can talk about that.
All right, but it'll be on the 30th. I'm just trying to massage out the time so it's most convenient for everyone. The committee will adjourn this hearing as of 3:47, but we will have a second hearing on this specific bill, 230-36 LS. So with that, please submit your testimony, your amendments as soon as possible, like within the next 30 minutes. And with that, I thank everyone for attending this virtual public hearing and for providing feedback and suggestion. The public hearing is now adjourned. It's now 3:47. Merry Christmas, and please all stay safe. Thank you.